He is a trial lawyer with more than 20 years' experience. He regularly appears on Fox News, CNBC, Al Jazeera, iHeartRadio, and Yahoo to discuss breaking legal news stories. He's recognized as one of the leading insurance litigation and sinkhole attorneys in Florida. And when he's not battling large insurance companies on behalf of policyholders, Mr. Corless authors and presents lectures throughout the United States on a wide variety of topics, including cannabis legalization, insurance coverage, complex expert testimony, criminal law, sports and entertainment law, and insurance bad faith. As I noted, he's been working on a book. He can tell you a little bit more about when he anticipates that coming out, but he's had it in the works for a couple of years now. So please help me welcome Mr. Ted Corless.
Thank you very much. And as a lawyer of 20 years, talking to people who voluntarily spend their days with lawyers, you have my sincerest apologies. Marijuana is coming to Main Street. Right now it's in 28 states. I am right now violating the law in the state of Florida, depending on who you ask. If you are carrying less than 20 grams of plant material in the state of Florida and you're stopped by a police officer, you're probably going to get a $75 fine. If you're stopped by a sheriff, you're probably going to get a misdemeanor. It's going to cost you around $400. So I have $475 with me at all times whenever I travel. And so far, no one has asked me to give that to them. Lightheartedly, the issue is that let's begin by saying that what I want to do in the next few minutes is to introduce you to this plant. I want to tell you why this plant has been so relevant to me. And then I'm going to show you why it should be relevant to you. And when we're done with that, I'm going to need your help. Why am I talking about marijuana? I have been practicing law. I was licensed in the state of Missouri in 1995, and I immediately started working for the biggest, the nastiest law firms I ever could. And I enjoyed that. I really did. I spent several years working for companies that represented some of the largest oil producers in the United States. I've represented large tobacco companies as a senior associate at Shook, Hardy & Bacon. And I represented some of the biggest insurance companies in the world when I was an attorney at Carlton Fields. But looking way back in my past, in 1988, when I was 22 years old, I moderated a debate between a member of the DEA, an agent in the DEA, who debated the Missouri president of the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. Very little publicity, and this was in 1988, and 1,000 people showed up. And I've pretty much been hooked on marijuana since then. Now, if you, let's begin with what Dana was saying. We know this plan is a variety of things, and that the reason why it is presented on this board in this way is to show you its simplicity. Lots of interesting thing to know about this particular plant. If we're going to be technically accurate, we call it cannabis sativa. And then if any of you have been tinkering with cannabis over the last couple of years, you'd also hear another description of cannabis indica. And if you really get into it, you know it is cannabis ruderalis, which is the kind of cannabis that we use to make rope. Thomas Jefferson used all three forms of it to make rope and to smoke a little. Now, marijuana is coming to Main Street because a lot of people were tired of the manner in which the federal government was regulating this product. Now, I joked earlier about it depends on who stops me regarding what the charge would be. That's called arbitrary enforcement of the law. Now, what do we know? What happens when we arbitrarily enforce the law? Who suffers when that happens? It's usually not lawyers like me. It's usually not adults like me. It's usually not white people like me. You see, people ask me, what is the most effective way I can protect myself about being arrested if cannabis is somehow in the picture. If I get caught with it or someone else does. My suggestion to you, first thing, be white. Because if you're black, you have four times the chances to be arrested for possession of cannabis. Even though the numbers reflect that white people smoke pot more than people of color. Now, why are we having these disagreements? Well, it's a real simple word that we just heard Jeff Sessions use recently called the supremacy clause. Now see, Republicans like to talk about cannabis because they're going to protect us from it. Now, the reality is when you hear you're being protected by the federal government, you should be very afraid. Now, why are we having this problem? Well, a lot of it has to do with the fact that this plant is pretty special. It's been around for over 3,000 years. We have Egyptian hieroglyphics that show cannabis being consumed by Pharaoh. He had a really good grower. And if you want to know the best places to grow marijuana, if you've ever been there and you've enjoyed wine, that's where you want to grow marijuana. If you're in what's commonly referred to as the Emerald Triangle in California, which prior to 1996, 80% of all cannabis grown in the United States was grown in 3 counties in Northern California: Mendocino, Humboldt, and Sonoma. And if you've ever been to wine country, you'll know that it's everywhere. Always ask the bartenders. Because right now, while California recently passed recreational marijuana, it has not yet been rolled out yet. Or rolled up. All right, so what happens is in 1996, there were a whole bunch of people in California that decided they didn't really care what the Supremacy Clause said. That Main Street was taking marijuana back from the federal government, who's held it hostage since 1937. Long time. The original prohibitions on cannabis that were formulated in 1937 were by a gentleman by the name of Henry Anslinger. Mr. Anslinger was a racist. He hung out with people from the Klan, and he loved to talk about jazz musicians because he was concerned about the influence of jazz culture on Americans' youth. Does that sound familiar to you? Any of you ever listen to Elvis? Ever hear stories about how Elvis was precluded from coming to places because they were threatened by his hips? Well, Anslinger wanted to use cannabis not necessarily to protect us from cannabis, but what he wanted to do is he saw all these immigrants coming from Mexico. He also saw a lot of people of color moving to urban centers like Detroit, Chicago, and New York. And they were bringing cannabis with them. And they needed something to be able to surveil them and to be able to arrest them to control their population. Let me put it this way. If people from Argentina had been coming through Mexico in 1937, yerba mate would be illegal. It had nothing to do with the plant. So when they passed the various laws that form what would ultimately become the Controlled Substances Act, cannabis got put on the same list with PCP, but not with opioids. Why not? Well, because the people in the state of Florida that are now slow-rolling Amendment 2, they don't want you to stop using opioids. Because in 2012, 1,500 people, 1,500 people, just in the state of Florida, overdosed on legally prescribed opioids. The opioid epidemic in Chicago is the reason why El Chapo is able to sell Mexican heroin. Because Big Pharma was producing so many opioids by the pound that when they finally figured out the epidemic they had created, they started restricting access to it. Well, here's the problem. If you're a junkie on OxyContin, it doesn't matter. You've got to have heroin. There really isn't a difference between heroin and the other opioids. So marijuana in 1996 became a citizens' initiative in California where the state of California said, we're going to create a not-for-profit organization that will allow individuals to grow their own marijuana and even allow other people to grow it for them, as long as it was being sold not for profit. Now you can imagine everybody in 1996 froze when that amendment passed. Well, nothing happened for almost 5 years. And a gentleman who I met walked into City Hall on Market Street in San Francisco and said, "Good morning, I would like a permit to grow medical marijuana." The guy kind of scratched his head, says, "I don't think we have one of those." So those of you who know constitutional law would know, well, I'm going to file a writ of mandamus. I'm going to ask a court to order you to produce one. He walked out. An hour later, he received a phone call. A man had sat down at a typewriter and prepared a permit application to allow you to grow medical marijuana. He took that permit and he went to the Emerald Triangle. And ultimately, he became the mayor of Sebastopol, California. Now, he asked those growers to come out of the light. And what I think I'm kind of asking you today, I want you to think about it. I want you to come out of the light too. I'm a pot smoker and I vote. Now, where are we in the state of Florida? Now, in 2014, there was a citizen initiative that was placed on the ballot after they got the required number of votes, or the signatures necessary to get it on the ballot as a constitutional initiative. You see, we have the pleasure of that ability. We have the ability to put a constitutional amendment on our ballot. We take that for granted, though, because not every state in the United States has that. It's easy to find the states that don't have it. Did they ever have slavery? Yes. No citizens initiative there. There's no citizens initiative in Alabama. There's no citizens initiative right in Mississippi. Why? Because they don't want the population getting together and deciding what the Constitution says. Instead, they're going to let the people who are in the legislature decide, who, as of right now, are in direct opposition to the will of the people. Now, in Florida, Initiative Amendment 2 failed in 2014 by only 3 percentage points. 57% of the people who voted for it. It also happens to be right around the time period when one of the leading advocates for cannabis in the state of Florida was seen intoxicated on a YouTube video. Maybe you heard that story. So why am I talking to you about this? Well, I generally avoid talking to lawyers, unless someone's paying me, of course. But a lot of lawyers see themselves in different ways. I'm here today primarily not as a lawyer, but as a private citizen exercising his First Amendment rights. Now, if you think this is a sensitive topic, since we published that we were going to be coming in here and I was going to be speaking on this topic, I received multiple emails from people who are here now with questions about cannabis. Now, we call it cannabis, not marijuana, because marijuana is a Mexican slang term. And technically, if you're talking about marijuana, you're not supposed to be talking about marijuana that would have come from the Hindu Kush Mountains. So I ask people to use the word cannabis. But my editor keeps changing that word. He doesn't like it. All right. But it's relevant to you for a lot of reasons. And what I have been doing over the last several months is gathering a list of areas where we as people in the legal profession will be addressing cannabis on Main Street. And here's our list. Now, I'm going to go through this list quickly, and I'm going to think that probably all of you are going to find yourself somewhere on this list. But if you haven't found yourself on the list, I can even tell you the one thing that's not on there, because I'm being pretty honest about where we will see cannabis moving forward. But the one that's not on there is medical malpractice. You really going to deal with when would we deal with medical malpractice in the context of marijuana? Well, so far, I've not heard any issues associated with doctors performing procedures without fully understanding the cannabis history of the patient. I haven't seen that yet. That's the only reason it's not on the list. But everything else you see here, and I'm going to read through this quickly, are areas where you, as members of the legal profession, will see cannabis on Main Street. Administrative law, it's a highly regulated area. And when Republicans regulate products that are sold to consumers, there's a lot of regulation. Because a lot of legislators don't like to talk about regulation unless it's cutting them, except when it comes to cannabis. I am now a card holder for medical marijuana in the state of Florida. In order to gain access to that, I had to file with an administrative agency my identity with copies of my birth certificate, my driver's license, and I have to provide specific information from my doctor before the state will issue me permission to use it. My doctor told me if I would have preferred not to go through that, he would be happy to provide me unlimited access to OxyContin. And in that context, he can write me a script as big as a blue ribbon hog, and I can shovel in opioids as much as I want. And in all likelihood, if I consume them for more than 10 days, when I stop taking them, I will suffer from withdrawal. Okay, I'm getting a little distracted. Opioids distract me. All right, antitrust law. Of course, we don't want our pot growers getting together and deciding what the price will be. I'll tell you right now that cannabis is selling at a variety of costs, but costs are coming down because there are so many people producing it. Business law, of course. How do you put together a transaction between two people where one agrees to provide 10 pounds of cannabis while the other agrees to pay for it? If there's a breach of contract, can you sue them? Now, when I interviewed a lawyer in Colorado who spends his entire day dealing with these issues, he told me that as a law firm, they agreed that under no circumstances would they ever assert illegality of contract as a defense, because that's what it is. It's an unenforceable agreement because it's illegal. It's void ad initio. You cannot seek enforcement of it in any state in the United States. Now, the judges in Colorado have seen a way around that by passing an amendment to the Colorado Constitution that says if it's protected under Colorado, it's an enforceable law. All right. Social justice and criminal justice. Well, that's pretty easy. Think about it. If you're a paralegal dealing with issues associated with people who are going to prison, and you have someone who is looking at an accelerated position on a sentencing chart because of a prior marijuana bust, but marijuana just got legalized, aren't you probably going to file a writ of habeas corpus to ask a court to toss it on fairness grounds? Which is one of the reasons why the federal government, especially our new Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, who vaguely reminds me of the sheriff on Smokey and the Bandit. But they don't want to deal with the hassle associated with all of the people that are in private prisons. Energy and resource management. Right now, the issue of sustainability and environmental protection is so much at the heart of the cannabis industry. I was in Denver a couple of weeks ago interviewing a dispensary owner who had to toss an entire harvest because they had discovered that someone had used a forbidden pesticide in cleaning the ductwork near one of his grow operations. He doesn't have insurance for his plants because he can't. That's a pickle. But energy and resource management is a pivotal part of the entire cannabis movement because the products that are being sold must be free of any kind of pest, and they also must be free of any kind of pesticides. Family law. Here's the common problem in family law that I hear. There's a divorce, shared custody of a child, and one of the spouses knows that the other one is a regular pot consumer, cannabis consumer. And so they request that the parties be subjected to regular drug tests. And so they use that against them. In fact, even if that individual has a medical marijuana card, you're probably going to find that the judges are going to be completely unpredictable. I really don't know what the judge is going to do, but that's a family law issue. Health law, of course. Most of the applications we have questions regarding illegal use of drugs. Is cannabis a drug? Yes. Medicine and drugs. This is medicine. This is drug. Okay. What do you think that cannabis can treat symptoms? The truth is that Big Pharma hasn't figured out a way to turn this into these. That's the reason why. But I'm going to hold that question for a second. Insurance law, easy. You can't buy insurance for it. In fact, if you have, we've had 2 different cases where I've represented individuals against insurance companies because tenants had turned the rental property into grow operations. Shockingly, that can be covered under certain insurance policies. Okay. Property law, easy. Because we're talking about locations that have grow operations. It's all over the place. Okay, tort law, public contract law, real property, trust and estate law, local government law, tax, tort law, or tort trial and insurance practice. Cannabis on Main Street is going to be affecting all of the legal issues associated with these areas. And I would expect, based upon what I saw in Colorado 5 years ago when I really started researching this issue, that you can see the similar, like when those legal issues started to creep out. And now we're seeing the same thing happening in the state of Florida. Because this is right now something of enormous interest to people, not only because of their own personal investment in it, but also because of the financial interests associated with it. Now, why? I know why I came to cannabis. Because of my own intellectual interest and some of my own personal background and the way I saw this roll out when I was a kid in the 70s. But maybe you come to cannabis involuntarily. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is when I interviewed a family whose daughter was having as many as 200 seizures a week and would code anywhere from 3 to 4 times a month. And I think we're clear on what I mean by that. They stopped breathing. A 9-year-old girl who, after being provided a low THC, high CBD oil, was able to go the entire day with fewer than a half dozen seizures. Or people who are wasting away from the effects of chemotherapy. And those individuals have told me that cannabis was the only thing that allowed them to be able to consume food without throwing up, and they're able to sleep through the night. Maybe you're coming to this issue because you or a member of your family had breast cancer. And somebody told you that there had been reports that CBD in high enough concentration can reduce the size of individual tumors. These, or a neurologist from Canada that I met who told me that he did a study on Huntington's chorea. Huntington's is a horrible neurological deficit. It's horrible. The chorea, Huntington's chorea, is when people will get contorted and begin seizing. But when provided a spray called Sativex that was 50% CBD and 50% THC, that stopped. And so when people tell me there's no medical purpose, I say, you know what? Maybe we don't have the data yet. But why is that? Maybe it's because the federal regulators that are looking at cannabis keep it a Schedule I drug. And it is nearly impossible to study a Schedule I drug. So, ma'am, you say it's been debunked. I say the people that are controlling it are preventing any opportunity we may have to study it more than we already have. But if you're one of those people that comes to cannabis involuntarily, maybe you would remember back in the 80s when the AIDS epidemic occurred and the FDA was restricting access to AZT and other methods of treatment for people who are HIV positive or in full-blown AIDS. And what they were saying is, we don't want to wait for the FDA and we shouldn't have to. Because those individuals have their own reasons. And what could those reasons be? But first, before I tell you the reasons I think, what do you think? What do the people think? Well, when people voted for Amendment 2 in 2016, things changed. There's 67 counties in the state of Florida. Guess how many of those 67 counties voted by a majority vote to pass Amendment 2? 100%. 67 out of 67. Now, in order for Amendment 2 to pass, we had to have more than 60% of the population vote for it. Did we make it? 71% of Floridians supported Amendment 2. Can you even conceive of anything else in the state of Florida that 71% of the people would vote on? I cannot find anything. I think I read somewhere that 75% of the people do not believe that angels live among us. How did our other politicians fare who are now trying to control cannabis for us? Well, let's start with the governor. Governor Scott won his election by 60,000 votes. 600,000 more people in Florida voted for Amendment 2 than voted against it. If 1 in 10 of those people voting had voted for another governor, Rick Scott would not have been governor. It's not my intention to necessarily affect elections, but what my intention is to empower people to understand that they are not in the minority when it comes to cannabis. They're very much in the majority. And people like me think the government should leave cannabis alone and let us take care of it ourselves. How did Pam Bondi fare? No, sorry. More people voted for Amendment 2 than voted for her or Rick Scott. And what about Donald Trump? Sorry. More people voted for Amendment 2 than voted for him. But all you really hear is Jeff Sessions, the new Attorney General, and people like Chris Christie coming out and parroting all of these other issues, like gateway drug, or saying that it can't be effective in reducing opioid, even though, do you know the state in the United States that has the lowest drop in opioid overdoses in the last 48 months? Colorado.
There you go.
Now, are we having an academic conversation about whether cannabis should be studied or whether it should be legalized? Well, I think I believed that we were, but we're not. What we're doing is we're talking about it, but the government is over here slow rolling it. And what I mean by that is they're in no hurry to legalize it. It's why Rick Scott appointed a director for the Division of Marijuana in the state of Florida that had 15 months of experience on his resume, which turned out, even though if you thought that was enough, it was a lie. Because the company that he said he was working for wasn't even formed until the day after he was appointed. So why are the roadblocks out there? Because, I mean, people say to me, we should legalize it. We should tax it. Okay. Or we say, you have to prove to me that this has medical value. And what I say is, I don't think so. Because you're telling me you're going to continue to put my fellow citizens in jail until I prove to you that it has medical value? So I started asking myself, why are you doing that? Well, let me tell you why. The estimates right now are by 2025, cannabis sales nationally will be in excess of $30 billion. That's a lot of money. You may sell $30 billion worth of this, but you're selling $200 billion of this. And we also know the more you smoke pot, the less you drink of this. So by the time we reach $30 billion in sales, or the United States does, big alcohol would have sold over $1 trillion worth of beer, spirits, and wine. They're in no hurry to legalize cannabis. What about big tobacco? You'd think if you smoke one, you smoke the other. In fact, most of you, come on, you've been 11:30, you're having that last martini, and you say, you know what, give me one of those cigarettes. What about gambling? Uh-oh. No. Nobody gets really high and heads to the slot machines. They don't do that. Huh? They don't do that. So we can go on and on. I mean, I think you might buy more Apple products. You know, that may be the only thing you do. You might buy another iPad or whatever. I'm still waiting for Apple to come out with a toothbrush. Because I'll do anything for Apple. Because the reality is, if you've got people who are coming to the state of Florida and they have $100 to spend, they come to the state of Florida and they got $100 to spend on vice or fun, they're going to spend, say, $90 of that on beer or fishbowl drinks with big straws coming out of them, which I think is fun, and I do it too. But what they don't want is you to now spend $50 on umbrellas for your drinks and $50 on cannabis. They don't want that. And so while we're having this intellectual conversation about why can't we really study cannabis, get it off Schedule 1, it's not like PCP. In fact, if you are curious, there has never been not one death associated with the consumption of cannabis. Not a single one. In fact, when I was in college, my professor of criminology on the first day said, if you can prove to me a case of an individual who died from consuming marijuana, I will give you an A in my class and you need not attend. And he said, I've been offering that the last 12 years and no one has ever proved it. He's still alive and I'm still looking. He gave me a B. All right. So we have big pharma, big tobacco, private prisons. Well, these prisons were built with complicated industrial revenue bonds that assume a certain population of prisoners over time. Well, the cannabis industry has blown up really in earnest in the last 8 years. A lot of these complicated industrial revenue bond projects are scheduled over 50 years. They're not interested in subtle changes in consumer behavior, like the idea that cannabis can go from being criminal to being decriminalized, like it has been in Hillsborough County. But what does this mean for Main Street in terms of how you're going to handle cannabis? There are a lot of questions that are left to be answered. Example, can you be pulled over for driving under the influence of alcohol? Yes, but can you be pulled over for driving under the influence of cannabis, or what is being called buzz driving? Well, I tell people all the time, don't travel with cannabis. Yeah, here I am. In fact, I'm going to take this lid off. I mentioned to the ladies in the back, let me know when you think you can smell it. But I met with a city alderman in Denver, and we were talking about the issue of driving under the influence. He told me an interesting story, which I think really makes the point about why people really screw this topic up. And that is that someone had proposed that in the event of a death, we do a blood draw, and if the individual driving had more than 5 nanometers of some metabolite in his blood, that would be an indication that they were intoxicated. Sounds pretty good. And they started pressing. Okay, 5 nanometers of what? I don't know. What do you mean you don't know? Well, there's a variety of metabolites. We can just pick one. Which one? I don't know. Okay, why 5 nanometers? I'm not sure. What about 6? Is there a difference between 4 and 6? I don't know. And they literally had a public debate about an issue that was a complete mirage because we can't study it the way we need to. And the other thing is, All that these regulations by the federal government are doing is creating a massive black market and gray market. I read an article just yesterday that the TSA has really stopped looking for marijuana. They don't care. They have bigger, more important things to do, like your safety, which is not affected by an individual who's bringing concentrates back from Colorado. I'm not encouraging people to do that. But here's a real simple idea I want you to think about. Wouldn't it be better to have a well-regulated legal product than a poorly regulated illegal one? Let me say that again. A well-regulated legal product than a poorly regulated illegal one. We have a lot of questions that I want to address that I received. And so here's what we're going to do. Okay. So this is my blog. Now, we built a studio at my law firm, a 1,000-square-foot studio, soundproofed it. We have interview space, multiple cameras, and I have photographers following me around all the time. What I'm going to ask you to do is I want you to either tweet to me or I want you to email me. It's ted@newsmunchies. And I want you to send me your questions. And here's why, a couple reasons. First, we can cover a lot more ground. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all of your questions. Yeah, that's a good idea. Take a picture of that. We're going to take all of your questions, and then I'm going to prepare an extended video where we're going to go through and answer every single question that we receive from you folks today. Because I mentioned earlier that several of you had reached out to me in anticipation of this presentation. The most common questions I get relate to adult children who are caring for an older parent, and they've just met with an oncologist who told them that based upon the diagnosis, the doctor strongly recommends that they gain access to medical marijuana. A lot of the problems with that are that based upon the immaturity of the Florida market, most of the products that you would want for that purpose are not yet available to you, but they are available in other states. But there is an enormous amount of questions and fear associated with this topic. And my primary objective today is not to come in and talk about boring topics associated with lawyers, but it's the idea of putting this subject in front of you and to open a conversation with you about it, to address whatever concerns that you may have. And here's the thing, I'm not asking you to agree with me. I think that's good. Disagreeing public discourse is very, very important. But what I'm not going to do is preach to you about it or recommend people consume marijuana. But I think what we all want is as we move forward on this topic, we want the rules and the regulations and the stigma associated with cannabis to go away. Because there's a lot of very successful people who have made cannabis a regular part of their lives. We can talk about presidents, whether you like them or dislike them. But there's a lot of other people out there too. I'm a big Carl Sagan fan. He wrote one of the very first books in the 1970s about advocating on behalf of the cannabis industry. But there are a lot of questions that you might have that you might not feel comfortable asking me. I'm gonna talk to you about a couple right now, and I'm gonna answer these questions when we do the video. How am I supposed to talk to my children about marijuana? See, when I was a kid, it was easy because my parents would just come in and go, it's illegal. If you get caught with it, you're going to go to jail. Now, that didn't really work very well. But because the messaging right now that you're getting about cannabis is so different than what it was when I was a child, or maybe when you were younger. So I think it's important that we share how we address these issues with children, especially if you have someone in the family that's consuming it. And really, while we're talking to children about drugs, maybe we ought to have a more honest conversation about what role they play. You can't tell a child that if they smoke marijuana, they're going to die, because when they do it and they don't trust you any longer. Really. Can you smoke pot and be a religious person? Can you do that? A very dear friend of mine is an especially devout Christian and also one of the biggest pot smokers I know. His answer to that is, it's not about the plant. It's about my behavior. And so he's comfortable consuming cannabis, and he wants to bring it to other people in his community as well. It's something that provides him tremendous joy and helps his wife, who suffers from symptoms associated with a serious neurological condition. Now, whether that's accurate or not, I don't know that I care. Because if you tell me that you think that there's medical value, I say there is. You say there isn't, I say it doesn't matter. Then don't use it. You know, when I talk to parents who have children who suffer from regular seizures, one of the most common questions they get is, so you live in a state where you can't buy medical marijuana. Move to one that has it. And that seems so simple, except for the fact that they have 2 other children who are in high school, and they're well planted where they are. Man has a job, he has his own company. The wife has a burgeoning CPA practice. So she's supposed to give that all up so that they can potentially use a drug to treat their child who has seizures every day? And the real bad news is, given the immaturity of that marketplace, less than 30% of the people with those deficits have any positive effect on cannabis. That's good enough to keep looking, but it's not enough to uproot your entire family for one shot at health and comfort. And so what I always tell people is, give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish, and you can sell him accessories. What I really want, this is what I need from you. We live or die by social media. I'd like you to find us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and I want to have a conversation with you. Tell me I'm wrong. I love it. Bring it. We'll talk about it. I'll give you information. Because, see, that's the great thing about today, other than the fact there wasn't a PowerPoint presentation, is that I'm not here selling you anything. I'm giving you ideas. And I want you to think about them and tell me if you agree or tell me if you don't. Email me and tell me you think I'm an idiot. Email me and tell me you need help. And I'll appreciate both of those emails. You guys have been terrific. Thank you very much.